Thank you. Oh, they're back there talking again. Morning, Jim. Okay. We're gonna be in 47 this morning. We're kind of skipping over 46. We read some from 46 last week because it was Bert, could you take it down just a scooch? We read some of 46 last week because it echoed what we were studying in 45. But 46 really belongs better attached to 47 than it does to 45. So that's where we're going to spend our time. 46 is a declaration of the condemnation of Babylon. But the poetry for that lies in 47, and that's why we're going to spend our time there. The first thing I want to do, though, is I want to take a look at verse 4. I'm going to read from the pulpit commentary, because if you look at verse 4, it seems out of place. And the verse reads, "As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel." Mr. Shine, whatever it is, suspects with some reason that this is the marginal note of a sympathetic scribe which made its way by accident into the text. It's certainly quite unlike anything else in the song, which would artistically be improved by its removal. And I agree in the way that I read this. So when we go through this, we're going to skip verse 4. Contextually, you'll find that 3 it runs right into 5, very smooth. So just wanted to do that first in case you wonder why we jump over that verse completely. So we're gonna read verses 1 through 3, and then we're going to tear it apart because there's some interesting things in there. "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you no longer shall be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Remove your veil, strip off the skirt, uncover the leg, cross the rivers. Your nakedness will be uncovered, your shame will also be exposed. I will take vengeance and will not spare a man." It's interesting because this one reads entirely different than many of the other ones, but okay. So first, this "sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon." The use of virgin with respect to nations typically implied that a nation had never suffered a defeat in war. Of course, we know that that's not the case with Babylon. Sennacherib conquered Babylon and put one of his sons on their throne. So we know that that's not what this context is for. More of the interpretations, though, is that this is a mockery of Babylon's self-proclaimed glamour and grandeur and pride. And that makes more sense in the context, especially following through from 46. So, yeah, on a very, very high level. Yeah. There's probably no quicker way to irritate someone than to mock someone with sarcasm. And that's what Isaiah is doing here, without a doubt. Okay, this daughter of the Chaldeans. What do you think is significant about this second call out within the same verse? It says, daughter of Babylon, and then, O daughter of the Chaldeans. I stumbled across something I found very interesting. Where did I write it down? Go to Genesis 11, verse 31. Terah took his son Abram. So who are we talking about? Verse 31 starts off with Terah took his son Abram. Who are we talking about? Abraham, yeah. His grandson Lot, son of Haran, his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. So this reference to this area with the Chaldeans goes all the way back to Abraham, and I don't think that that's an accident that Isaiah uses that double call out. My opinion, verses 2 and 3 probably should not have been separated. The verses run together very smoothly, and they follow one single thought. These millstones, this was something that was interesting. To take the millstones and grind meal, this was almost exclusively the job of female slaves, and that was grinding corn. Now, the mill grinds and those kind of things don't really appear until Caesar, if I remember what I read right. So it's several hundred years later. But back in this time, they would hand grind corn. It was laborious. It was just an absolute burden. So that's why it befell on female slaves, and it was considered the lowest and the most demeaning form of employment. And so what you have is God, through Isaiah, telling Babylon that that's what their job is going to be, the lowest and most demeaning. Commentators, and I agree, say the intent is probably to denote the level of captivity that they would be subject. That's how far they're going to fall. Your nakedness will be uncovered. Most of the commentators turn to the obvious. To strip one naked in this culture and time was to degrade and to humiliate. Where do we see that in the New Testament? I know it's still early. Y'all wake up now. Go to Matthew 27. The whole time frame that leads up to the cross. That's right. That's right. Matthew 27, beginning in 28. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt down before him to mock him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head repeatedly. We probably see this kind of concept even today to some extent, although I think it's lost a lot of its intent in terms of the humiliation that's intended to be. Clark brought up a different comparison, which I thought was interesting. He says that this is repeatedly seen in Bengal, at the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent, where there are very few bridges. So having neither shoes nor socks, both sexes will truss up their loose garments and wade through the water. Okay? So that's part of this concept. And then when the water gets deeper, they have to bring them up higher and higher in order to get through this water. And so that's kind of the concept of your nakedness will be uncovered. So, which I thought was an interesting description of this, and it makes sense because they would have been, I mean, face it, if they maintained royalty, they would have gotten a boat or somebody would have carried them. But this whole concept of the degradation and the humiliation of Babylon is on every level. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then follows up with uncover your nakedness, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I give some validity to Clark here in his comparison in the thought process. Yeah. Yeah. This verse finishes very interesting. It reads a little different depending on the different versions, but mostly it's pretty consistent. The vengeance part's pretty obvious. I will take vengeance and will not. Now see, this one here, New American Standard, I think it is, reads, and will not spare a man. I didn't see that in the other versions. Most of the versions read, I will not meet you as a man, or something along those lines. And if you look in your text, you'll see that meet you as a is in, or I guess you as a is in italics. Literally, the verse was translated, I will not meet a man. I thought that was kind of hard. Even the commentators think the context is a little strange in here. Most of the commentators conclude that this is a statement to the effect that I will meet you as God, not as man, and you cannot withstand me. And I think that's certainly contextually correct. But it seems to me to be kind of obvious. So let me ask you a question. Outside of the garden, when did God meet man as a man? I thought about that, and I thought, that's not in the same context, but I thought, hold that thought right there. I'm sorry? Okay, in verse 3 it says, I will not meet you as a man, depending on the translation you have. And so the commentators think that this is God saying, I will meet you as God, not as man, and you will not be able to withstand me. I didn't think about that one, but yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought of Noah in Genesis 6:13, where God said to Noah, but even at that, it's not really God approaching Noah as a man. It's still God approaching Noah as God. So I struggled with that to find these. I came across the Tower of Babel. That's probably the closest that I found. Go to Genesis 11:5 and see the language that's used there. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language. Okay. That's probably the closest language that I've found of God interacting with men on a level that they would have perceived him as man. Outside of Christ, because Christ was fully man and fully God. Yeah.
Maybe also when Abraham was approached by the three men, it sort of leads the impression that it could have been God.
It does. It implies at least Christ, but it's certainly, definitely angels. But yeah, I would lend to think that that was Christ probably that also interacted directly with Abraham. But what I found was when I really looked at it is almost exclusively it says the Lord said, or the Lord spoke to, implying that he was approaching them as God. But with God. Well, yeah, I saw that. Enoch was one of the references, and I have Enoch on here. But if you look at the language, though, it really doesn't say that God approached Enoch as a man. It says Enoch walked with God. And I may be splitting hairs and maybe technicalities, but it was just some of the things I noticed, I guess. Which caused me to wonder about the context of I will meet you if you interpret this as that I will meet you as God, not man. It almost seems unnecessarily redundant.
Seems like for God to speak to us at our level, he has to speak down. He's not having any pity on us at all. Or like my translation says, I will not have pity on anyone, or I will not meet. If he just stays where he is, it's an unscalable wall for us.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if we've exhausted the mercy, say, for a time, like maybe they've done here, that it's a brutal thing to not have protection.
Yeah. In this context, I mean, God is expressing condemnation of Babylon. So, yeah, without a doubt.
You know, sometimes your kids think they know everything, and they step back and let them fail. It sounds like that. Shame will be exposed, and you'll get to see just how life really is. It's a different scale, of course, but the same sounds like all he has to do is step back.
But in this case, he's not stepping back. In this case, he's taking a direct step forward. And that's one of the things that makes this different and makes this interesting. Again, if we go back and look at 44 and 45, where God is raising up Cyrus and taking Cyrus by the hand, this is a very definitive, positive action by God, not inaction by withdrawal, which I think is interesting. One of the things that I read or maybe read into, is if you keep it in the context of the 3 verses, could it mean that Babylon will not be greeted with the respect of a man? When we meet someone on the street, we should meet them man to man, right? With mutual respect. I kind of read into this that there will be no respect for Babylon. I don't know if that's accurate, and I don't know if that's me putting a little too much color in the passage. But. And part of my conclusion also came back to the continual context of God raising up Cyrus and taking him by the hand and laying down everything in front of him so that Cyrus could go through and obliterate these nations. So, and then also, the other side of that, of course, is that what history tells us is that when Cyrus conquered a country, he treated those that he had conquered with probably more respect than most other conquerors did. So. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It could very well. Could very well, Tom. I certainly would not argue that. Like I said, Enoch was one that I thought of that came across in my study. I didn't take a lot of time. The verses that I looked at, and I may have read them wrong. I read them like this, but yeah. I thought of Moses too. But then it's real clear that God approached Moses as God through the burning bush and that. I guess we'll get to ask Enoch one day, and that will be a very interesting conversation. So, no. But my point is that almost never do we see in the scriptures that God lowers himself to appear as a man. Which is why I find that context to be a little strange for the commentators to use that interpretation.
That reminds me of the verse in Revelation 14:9, where we saw him through a glass dimly lit, but when that perfect comes, we'll see face to face.
Yeah. That's 1 Corinthians 13, isn't it? Yep. Yeah, that's some interesting poetry by Paul in that chapter too. So. Verses 5 and 6. Sit silently and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. Here's that Chaldeans coming back up again. For you will no more be called the Queen of Kingdoms. I was angry with my people. I profaned my heritage and gave them into your hand, and you did not show mercy on them. On the aged you made your yoke very heavy. I looked at that and thought, sit in silence and darkness. What's the first thought that comes to mind? Yeah. I was a little more abrupt in my thinking, but yeah. My thought was, sit down and shut up. And when I did more study, that's pretty much what God was telling them to do. This sit in silence is not new. If you go to Lamentations, you see Lamentations 2, beginning in verse 9. And this is a reference to Israel. Her gates have sunk into the ground. He has destroyed and shattered their bars. Her king and her princes are exiled among the nations. The law is no more, and even her prophets find no vision from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes fail from weeping. I am churning within. My heart is poured out in grief over the destruction of the daughter of my people, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. So this sitting in silence was an illustration of woe and depression and basically being told to go to your room. And I can see the face of every one of my sons as teenagers when they were told to do that, and the grumpy look on their face as they stomped off. The darkness part probably alludes to the obscurity that Babylon would fall, no longer the premier nation of the world. Because Babylon was something at that time frame until Cyrus was led through them. So the concept here is that this premier country would fall into complete desolation. God tells Babylon that they had a purpose, and they abused that purpose. God made them great for that purpose, but they believed they made themselves great. Therein lies the problem. The balance of this chapter is spent in complete prophecy of a nation that was more than 100 years away. Babylon took the Jews into captivity around 598 BC. This writing is done around 712 BC, and Isaiah died around 685-ish. So this entire prophecy of what's going to happen to Babylon, they haven't even risen to this level of power yet, and these chapters are talking about their complete destruction and why they're going to be consumed that way. Compare Babylon to other nations. Anything ever really changed? Think about the nations through history. What are the similarities? Nobody wants to dare throw out similarities? Yeah, that was my first thought, Josh. But what are the similarities? Not just our nation, but nations through history. Arrogance, absolutely. They all pretty much start the same, don't they? You get a charismatic / powerful leader that gathers a nation together, and they start to conquer other nations, and they grow great and strong. Then they become arrogant, they become sloppy, and what happens? They fall. And you can just track it all the way through. And we don't seem to be heading down a different path. So, yeah.
That's why pride is such a terrible sin, because the proud shall be brought down, which is something to think about.
Look at verse 10. and you felt secure in your wickedness and said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge, they have deluded you. You've said in your heart, I am, and there is no one beside me. That isn't Isaiah mocking their arrogance. That hasn't even happened yet. That's the interesting part of this. You got to remember, this has not even happened yet. He is not, he's not mocking individuals that are alive. And he goes on to talk about their idol worship, their false teachings, their false religions. Look at verse 15. Wow, I did not expect to go through all of this. Look at verse 15. Look how it ends. And then take a look around us. Each has wandered in his own way. There is none to save you. What do we see? Who has a realistic or reasonable count of the different Protestant groups? Yeah. Isn't that a fantastic illustration of each has wandered in their own way? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Nope. Which is what we talked about last week with the difference between God controlling what goes on and us still maintaining our free moral choice. That there is a difference between the two. Yeah? I'm sorry? 45,000. Wow. I wonder if that includes furries. 45,000 Protestant groups. Wow. And each has wandered in his own way. There is none to save you. If that isn't so clear. Let's take a side step for a second here, because to me it's an example of all of this. Who can find Samson real quick? While you're looking for the passages, what was Samson's real sin? Why was Samson really punished? I'm sorry? What do you mean? Be more specific. Because, see, I think he falls into the same thing here. So,
It's like knowing your strength, knowing where God is, the strength that God is. And I just use that strength to do what I want to do.
okay.
And therefore, you rebel against God.
Okay. Absolutely. But I think in this case, well, there's no question Samson had a lot of pride. But I think his actual downfall was not necessarily in his, well, yeah, I guess it could have been. Yeah. Okay.
Samson was very self-indulgent.
He was.
He knew what he wanted and it didn't matter how he got it.
Okay. So what are the circumstances that lead up to him being captured and blinded?
It kind of depends on where you draw that line. A lot of men, I would say more young men, but also men, don't perceive real danger. Didn't perceive the danger of having a wife from among the Philistines. He didn't perceive the dangers of a lot of things. Every time he told her this secret, she would immediately betray it. And so he knew she would do it. So ultimately, he tells her the truth.
Did he? Did he tell her the truth?
That if she cut his hair, he would lose his strength. And I'm wondering if he even believed it himself. His hair had never been cut. Maybe it seems silly to him to think he would suddenly be bleeding, but then his hair was cut.
I think Tom knows where I'm heading with this. Let's take a good look at that. Okay? So, if that's the case, if that was the truth, then where was Samson's strength? Well, which was it? Because what did Samson believe? Samson believed his strength was in his hair, didn't he? He told her, if you cut my hair. Okay? Because that's where my strength is, right?
She did, after that, what she had consistently done with the chains and the ropes.
So, obviously Samson believed that because that wasn't the first lie that he told his wife, was it?
Saying he believed it because it wasn't the first lie.
Yeah, because he had told lies to her already. So it couldn't be because he lied to her that he was.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think he really believed it. We have hindsight. We look back, she cut his hair, he was bleeding.
That's why I conclude he believed that, which I believe was his sin. If he had told her, my strength lies in God and there's nothing you can do about it, how does that change everything?
Did he think he was lying or not when he told her? That's
He didn't think he was lying the last time.
about the ropes.
No, about his hair. She did. She did. That's right. And so he believed that he caved in and told her the truth. The problem is that was also a lie because his strength was in God, not in his hair.
Samson didn't notice that the Lord had left him. He was surprised himself when his strength was not there anymore.
Yeah.
That's sort of scary. Samson didn't even know that he was no longer with God anymore.
Because he believed his strength was in his hair.
Well, I mean, he tried to fight and he was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have his strength anymore. Now, he knew his hair was gone, okay? But he still went out to fight. Then he realized I'm not strong anymore. It could have been simply that, okay, this time, cut my hair, and then next time, it's almost like he was mocking his wife. Okay,
I think there was a measure of that, but I think Tom's right. I think she finally just beat him up verbally.
But his journey started further back.
Oh, yeah.
First he married before.
Oh, no doubt, Chad. No doubt. And I agree with all of those things, is that he ignored a lot of danger signs before he ever got to that point. Absolutely. Yeah.
Isn't the point that, 47:15, each wandered in his own way, is an echo of Judges 21:25. In those days there was no king, and everyone did what was right in his own time. They're saying the same thing.
Yeah. Isaiah's great about that, isn't he? Pulling thoughts from before and putting them right back in his writings.
The question is a reflection there.
Yeah. 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 Yes, ma'am. It's all downhill after that. I'm just agreeing with what Karen said. I'm not going in.
I'm not really sure that Samson married Delilah. I think that was part of his issue, that he was going to all these different women and he was giving in to the nations, so to speak. He was starting to just do whatever he wanted, like you were saying. And as a result, he gave in to her. He should have kept his mouth shut.
Yeah. Or at least acknowledge where his power and his strength really belong. Yeah. Of course, yeah. Jews had a big problem with not following what God had instructed them to do in terms of marrying within themselves and not bringing in foreign influences.
Samson kind of personifies that. And also, I forget her name now, the wife in Hosea.
Yeah.
You know, it's trading royalty, trading daughtership, trading wifehood for prostituting herself and enslaving herself
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah, and of course she's a comparison to Israel as a whole. Yeah. Gomer, yeah. You know, as a kid, I always wondered where that phrase came from. Don't be a Gomer. And it was always used in a... Yeah. But again, to your point, Jim, I've been amazed and really impressed at how Isaiah does continually reflect to what the Israel nation would have known and would have known his references, unquestionably. And I think this double call out of the Chaldeans, I think that goes all the way back. Because otherwise there'd be no need to use both Babylon and Chaldean. Any last comments? Did you close, Josh?
Our Father God, as we bow and give thanks again for the blessing that you have granted us to be here, study your word, those things that you have spoken. So let us continue to understand the truth, keep pondering to ourselves that you have all power and assurance, control of everything that surrounds us, everything
Thank you all very much.